In the aftermath of the Korean War, the global aerospace industry was consumed by a singular obsession, the conquest of Mach 2. This was the double sonic revolution, an era where aircraft were designed to fly at twice the speed of sound, transforming from agile dogfighters into steered projectiles. The strategic impetus was clear. The primary existential threat to the great powers was no longer the fighter-escorted bomber of World War II, but the high-altitude, nuclear-armed strategic bomber. To intercept such a threat, the fighter had to possess a zoom climb capability and raw speed that exceeded the physical limits of traditional aerodynamic design. This pursuit of speed created a unique technological paradox known as the Mach 2 trap. As aircraft crossed this threshold, the physics of combat changed. At these velocities, a standard 3G turn required a radius of nearly 15 miles, making the visual range maneuvering of MiG alley appear archaic. Aviation planners in both the Pentagon and the Kremlin hypothesized that the era of the dogfight was over. They envisioned a future where combat would be decided by radar screens and long-range missiles, where the pilot functioned less as a knight and more as a systems manager. However, when these new rules were put to the test in the skies over Vietnam and the Indian subcontinent, the incredible speed that defined the era was often a liability rather than an asset. The Mach 2 revolution had prioritized interception at the expense of agility, and the result was a systemic crisis in air superiority. The Soviet Union's path to Mach 2 was an exercise in ruthless optimization. Following the success of the MiG-15 and the transonic MiG-17, the Mikoyan-Gurevich Design Bureau was tasked with creating a point defense interceptor capable of neutralizing Western bombers at high altitudes. The result was the MiG-21, NATO codenamed Fishbed. Known to the Soviets as Balalaika due to its triangular wing shape, and to the Vietnamese as the Silver Swallow, the MiG-21 was the first Soviet fighter capable of sustained flight at twice the speed of sound. The MiG-21's design philosophy centered on simplicity, reliability, and mass production. It was a lightweight aircraft, weighing slightly less than 10 tons, which allowed it to maintain a high thrust-to-weight ratio even with the relatively primitive turbojet technology of the mid-1950s. Its 57-degree delta wing was specifically chosen for its ability to maintain stable airflow at high angles of attack, while minimizing wave drag during supersonic dash. However, this configuration came with a hidden cost. Delta wings are notorious for bleeding energy during sustained turns. Every degree of turn at high G loads acted as a massive aerodynamic brake, rapidly decelerating the aircraft from Mach 2 to subsonic speeds. In the Soviet doctrine, this energy loss was secondary to the MiG-21's primary mission, ground-controlled intercept. The MiG-21 was never intended to hunt for enemies independently. Instead, it was an extension of a vast ground-based radar network. Pilots were vectored toward their targets by controllers who would position the MiG in a perfect slingshot ambush. The pilot would then ignite the afterburner, close the distance at supersonic speed, fire a pair of R-3S Atoll infrared-guided missiles, and then immediately disengage before the enemy could react. This hit-and-run guerrilla tactic was a direct evolution of the MiG-17's role in North Vietnam, where the lack of advanced sensors was mitigated by superb ground-level coordination. While the Soviets embraced the lightweight point defense concept, the United States turned the Saber's legacy into a heavy multi-role missile platform. The McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II was the titan of the 1960s, a 19-ton beast powered by two of the most powerful engines in existence, the General Electric J-79. Unlike the MiG-21, the Phantom was designed as an all-weather interceptor for the Navy, tasked with protecting the fleet from massive waves of Soviet cruise missile carriers. It was a heads-down aircraft, meaning its primary combat function was performed by the radar intercept officer in the back seat, who managed the complex APQ series radar while the pilot focused on the flight path. The F-4 represented the peak of the Missileer Doctrine. This philosophy, championed by civilian planners in the McNamara-led Department of Defense, posited that the era of the gun was over. In their view, the combination of the radar-guided AIM-7 Sparrow and the infrared-guided AIM-9 Sidewinder rendered visual dogfighting unnecessary. The early F-4 variants deployed to Vietnam were not even equipped with an internal cannon. Planners argued that if a target got close enough for a gun, the pilot had already failed his mission. This belief was supported by flawed statistical modeling. Testing in controlled environments predicted a 71% kill probability for the Sparrow and a 65% for the Sidewinder. However, these tests did not account for the humid, vibratory, and high-G environment of actual combat. In the reality of Southeast Asia, the Phantom found itself in a Mach 2 trap. It was designed to fly at Mach 2.2, but the vast majority of its combat occurred at subsonic speeds, between 10,000 and 20,000 feet, where its heavy weight and twin engines, which produced telltale trails of thick black smoke, made it a massive target for the nimble MiGs. Parallel to the development of the Phantom was the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter. If the MiG-21 was a pencil and the F-4 was a brick, the F-104 was a missile with a man in it. Designed by Kelly Johnson of Skunk Works, the F-104 was the purest expression of the Mach 2 interceptor. It featured incredibly thin, stubby wings and a razor-sharp fuselage designed to punch through the sound barrier with minimal resistance. In the mid-1960s, the Starfighter was the pride of the Pakistan Air Force and the mainstay of several NATO nations, including West Germany, where it earned the moniker Widowmaker due to its high accident rate. The F-104 was the ultimate high-altitude interceptor, but its design made it nearly incapable of dogfighting. Its wings were so small that they provided almost no lift during high-G maneuvers, meaning that if a starfighter attempted to turn with a MiG-21, it would stall or enter a dangerous pitch-up condition. Its primary advantage was its acceleration. At high altitudes, nothing could catch it, but at low altitudes, where most air combat in the regional wars of the 60s and 70s took place, the F-104's speed was a trap that limited its pilot's reaction time and situational awareness. The technical disparities between the MiG-21 and the F-104 were never more evident than during the 1971 Indo-Pakistani War. This 13-day conflict provided a rare experiment for air combat analysts, as it pitted the IAF's MiG-21 FLs directly against the PAF's F-104As. The world watched as the pride of the American aerospace industry met the backbone of the Soviet Air Force in a series of direct confrontations. On December 12, 1971, at 14:02 hours, the air war reached its crescendo over the Jamnagar Air Base. Two F-104s, led by the legendary wing commander Mervyn Middlecoat, a decorated veteran of the 1965 war, were detected approaching at low level to strafe the airfield. Two MiG-21s, led by Flight Lieutenant Bharat Bhushan Soni, were scrambled to intercept. The engagement was short, brutal, and definitive, as the F-104s attempted to aggress at sea level. Soni used his MiG's superior maneuverability to position himself on Middlecoat's 6 o'clock. Soni initially attempted to fire an R-3S Atoll missile, but the heat haze of the Gulf of Kutch and the F-104's evasive flares defeated the seeker. Refusing to let the target escape, Soni closed the distance to 300 meters, well within the dead zone for missiles, but perfect for a gun kill. Middlecoat, trapped by his aircraft's inability to outturn the MiG at low altitude, could not shake the pursuit. Soni fired 3 precise bursts from his twin-barrel cannon. The F-104 erupted in flames and pitched into the Gulf. Middlecoat ejected, but in a display of respect and humanity, Sony contacted his base to request a rescue team for his adversary. Despite these efforts, Middlecoat was never found in the shark-infested waters. The 1974 war demonstrated that at the altitudes where wars were actually fought, the MiG-21 was the superior platform. The F-104 was unsuited to the tactical environment of the region. The outcome of these duels shattered the myth of the Starfighter's invincibility and proved that Indian pilots, previously intimidated by the F-104's speed records, had mastered the new rules of the Mach 2 era. In the skies over Vietnam, the Mach 2 trap was even more complex. The U.S. Air Force and Navy were fighting a sophisticated air defense network that combined high-speed MiG-21 interceptors with the deadly SA-2 surface-to-air missile. American pilots were forced into a tactical dilemma: fly low to avoid the SAMs and be picked off by the MiG-17s and MiG-21s, or fly high to engage the MiGs and be vulnerable to the SAMs. By January 1967, the MiG-21 threat had become so severe that the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing, Wolfpack, led by Colonel Robin Olds, devised a massive ruse to lure the MiGs into a fight on American terms. Operation Bolo was a wolf in sheep's clothing. F-4C Phantoms were equipped with the same electronic jamming pods used by the bomb-laden F-105 Thunder Chiefs, flew the same flight patterns, and used the same radio call signs. The North Vietnamese ground controllers, believing they were vectoring their MiGs against vulnerable strikers, sent the 921st Fighter Regiment into the air. When the MiG-21s emerged from the clouds, expecting to find bomb-heavy thuds, they instead encountered air superiority configured Phantoms armed with Sparrows and Sidewinders. In a matter of minutes, 7 MiG-21s were shot down without a single American loss. Robin Olds, an old-school dogfighter from World War II, personally scored a kill, becoming the only U.S. Air Force ace with victories in both World War II and Vietnam. Despite the success of Bolo, the day-to-day reality of combat revealed the deep flaws in the Missileer Doctrine. The missiles simply did not work as advertised. Lieutenant Bill John, an F-4 radar intercept officer, provided a harrowing account of the 1972 engagement that illustrates the systematic failure of high-tech weaponry. I was furiously spinning the thumb wheel on the controls of my radar, trying to get a lock as our F-4 rolled over the top, inverted and pulled hard toward the MiG-21 in front of us. I got it, then shouted to Sam, "Shoot!" Everything seemed to go still for an instant, but nothing happened. A malfunction had prevented the Sparrow missile from launching. The battle had only just begun. This experience was echoed by dozens of pilots. The Sparrow was particularly prone to failure. Of the 149 Sparrows launched during the first 7 months of 72, only 20 resulted in kills, a success rate of just 13%. The infrared AIM-9 Sidewinder was only slightly better, frequently distracted by the sun, ground reflections, or the high G turns of the agile MiG-21. One of the most famous dogfights occurred on April 16, 1972, between Dan Cherry in an F-4 and Nguyen Hong Mai in a MiG-21. Cherry's account highlights the desperate nature of these encounters. I rolled out, saw him, and just headed right for him, and he broke left and went right into a cloud bank. Nosing skyward, the MiG had lost speed in his climb. He was directly in my killing zone. I tried to fire 2 heat-seeking Sidewinders, but they failed to track. Finally, I fired a radar-guided Sparrow. It did a barrel roll maneuver before riding the beam to the target. The 65-pound warhead detonated, ripping the wing off the MiG. Hong Mai ejected but sustained severe injuries, breaking both his arms due to the failure of his ejection seat's arm protection mechanism. This engagement, like many others, showed that even when the technology worked, it was a last resort rather than an automatic victory. By 1968, the U.S. Navy and Air Force realized that their air-to-air performance was unacceptable. The kill ratio had dropped from a predicted 10-1 to a staggering 2-1. In response, the Navy commissioned Captain Frank Ault to conduct an air-to-air missile system capability review. The resulting Ault Report became the most influential document in modern naval aviation. Ault identified 242 problem areas. He discovered that missiles were being handled like rounds of ammunition rather than the delicate electronic instruments they were. The vacuum tubes in the AIM-7 were frequently shattered by the jolt of carrier landings, and the seeker heads of the AIM-9 were often blinded by the humidity of the South China Sea. More importantly, Ault found that pilots were being required to fight a heads-up engagement with a heads-down system. The F-4's cockpit was a nightmare of switches and dials that required the pilot to take his eyes off the enemy to verify his weapon settings. The report's primary recommendation was the creation of a graduate-level flight school dedicated to air combat maneuvering. This was the birth of Top Gun. The ultimate admission of the Mach 2 trap's failure was the introduction of the F-4E. After years of pilots begging for a cannon, even resorting to mounting external gun pods that shook the airframe and reduced accuracy, the Air Force finally equipped the Phantom with an internal M61 Vulcan 20mm rotary cannon. Major Gary Ritterbusch's engagement on September 12, 1972, serves as the definitive proof of the gun's necessity. Flying the F-4E, Ritterbusch encountered a MiG-21 near Hanoi. After 2 Sparrows and 3 Sidewinders all failed to guide, he switched to his 20mm cannon. He fired short bursts that hit the MiG's left wing, then performed a high-speed yo-yo to correct his closure rate and fired another burst into the cockpit. This kill, achieved at extreme speeds, remains a landmark in the history of aerial combat and a stark reminder that in the Mach 2 era, the simplest weapon was often the most effective. While the Americans struggled with their technology, the North Vietnamese pilots of the 921st Sao Do Regiment were honing a lethal asymmetric doctrine. They were led by aces like Nguyen Van Koch, who remains the top-scoring pilot of the war with 9 confirmed kills. Nguyen's memoirs reveal a tactic known as the double attack. The VPAF would use their slower MiG-17s as bait to perform a head-on pass and distract the American escorts, while the faster MiG-21s would sneak in from the rear, guided by ground control interception. I was scrambled as a wingman of Nguyen Ngoc Do. I noticed F-105s flying beneath us at an altitude of 2,500 meters. My leader and I dived at the U.S. fighter bombers, which were unaware of our presence. My leader shot down the second airplane. I also opened fire, downing another Thunder Chief. The MiGs did not wait for retaliation. We disengaged rapidly. The VPAF understood that their MiG-21s could not win a prolonged war of attrition. Instead, they utilized their hit-and-run tactics against the Americans. They knew the Phantoms were burning fuel at a rate of 150 pounds per minute in afterburner. By forcing the Phantoms to stay in the area and maneuver, the MiGs could often win simply by waiting for the Americans to hit bingo fuel and be forced to retreat through the SAM rings. The complexity of these missions is perhaps best exemplified by the rescue of Roger Locker, or Oyster 1 Bravo. Locker had been evading capture for 23 days deep in North Vietnamese territory after his F-4 was shot down. When he finally made radio contact, General John Vaught shut down the war to rescue him, committing 119 aircraft to the effort. Fred Hastings, a WSO who flew the MiG cap for the rescue, described the intensity of threading the needle between the SAM rings of Hanoi and Yen Bai. The pilots felt a different kind of calm during these missions. While standard strike missions often had ambiguous value for the risks taken, a search and rescue mission was worthy of giving one's all. We were elated that the rescue had been successful. We victory rolled our way back home. This sentiment highlights the human element that the Mach 2 revolution had tried to program out of existence. The era of the double sonic jets was a period of magnificent technical achievement and profound tactical failure. The MiG-21 and the F-4 Phantom were the apex of their generation, but they were designed for a war that never happened, a clean, high-altitude nuclear exchange decided by missiles. When they were forced into a messy, low-altitude world of visual dogfighting, the Mach 2 speed they were built for hampered their performance. The air combat lessons of the 1960s and 70s were written over the Red River Valley and the Gulf of Kutch. They taught the world that speed is not a substitute for situational awareness, that missiles are not a substitute for the gun, and that technology is not a substitute for the stick and rudder skill of a well-trained pilot. The MiG-21 is known as a Cold War icon and a battle-hardened street fighter that proved simplicity and reliability can outmatch complexity. The F-4 Phantom, despite its initial flaws, evolved into one of the most versatile and beloved aircraft in history, the last of the gunfighters in an era that tried to forget the gun. Together, these aircraft define a turning point in history, the moment when humanity realized that even at twice the speed of sound, the old rules of the sky are still relevant. Hello folks, this is the guy from Military Mind Map. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing to support more deep dives like this.